Britain has moved now quite extraordinarily, particularly following some of the legal arguments that have emerged from people who have transitioned in the past and regretted it. And we've seen the controversial and well-known, even here in this country, Australia, Tavistock Gender Clinic actually shut down, as I understand it. Can you tell us a little bit about the history of that clinic and what's happened amongst people who have transited it and then regretted it? Because I understand that's been a really significant issue and why the Brits have been prepared to have a long, hard look at what's going on.
Yeah, so you won't know this if you live abroad, but the weird thing about the Tavistock Clinic is it's part of a much larger clinic, which is very psycho and analytical. So if you know in this country about treatment for mental distress, what you'll know about the Tavistock is where you turn up to do sort of Freudian and Jungian analysis and sit on a couch for 10 years, you know. I exaggerate with the 10 years. Like, it's the most unmedicalized place you could possibly go to talk about any sort of mental issue. But some decades ago, they set up a tiny clinic to see children. So with very, very, very rare conditions, it's common to have just one centre that takes it from a very large area, because otherwise the people working there won't get enough practice to be good. And this was the one and only clinic for the whole of England and actually Wales as well. And it saw, a couple of dozen kids a year in the first few years, all boys, or pretty much all boys, all of them very little. And these are the kids who from age 3 or 4 are saying things like, I want to cut my penis off, God made a mistake with me, I'm meant to be a girl, and so on. And it treated them, with sort of what's now called watchful waiting. Just support them, support the families to not get freaked out by this, just kind of help them to not hate themselves, bring them towards puberty, and then puberty tends to resolve the issues. We know that, we've known that for decades, that if you just support kids who think this when they're very little, puberty works it out for them.
That's the common sense.
And then at some point, sorry, go on, John.
That's the sort of common sense position. Give it some time, a lot of these things work itself out. And yet there's been fierce pushback from the usual suspects, the activists. Fierce pushback.
Yeah. I'll get to that because there is a reason. It's not out of nowhere. But That was what was being done when that clinic was working properly. And then activists got to it and said that, look, abroad in America, they're giving children puberty blockers. They understand that these children are born in the wrong body and so on. And they pushed and the clinic folded. And we know that really from the data that's come out since. And it became a quite activist clinic. And from 2011 and then speeding up in 2014, by this time the waiting lists were quite big because you can't see clinics without seeing what's happening in schools and online. There's a increasing numbers coming to the clinics. They can't operate properly that way. So the kids turn up after years on the waiting list, massively distressed, completely fixated on the drugs that they're going to get, thinking those are going to fix their problems. You can't actually talk to them sensibly anymore. And they did a very poor job. No standards, no comparison, no level setting between different clinicians, the things that you do in a careful clinical setting. Their record keeping was terrible. And then Kira Bell, a young woman who had been quite convinced that she was meant to be a boy. She's lesbian or bisexual, and she's quite masculine in her interests and presentation. And that kind of fooled her into thinking she was meant to be a boy. She went there, she aged out, she was over 16 by the time she got off the waiting list, but she ended up having a mastectomy and taking testosterone and quite quickly realising it was all a mistake, and she took a court case. And that the verdict in that was actually overturned, but the evidence in the court case really showed for the first time to the world how poor the practice was in the Tavistock and how poor the record keeping was. They couldn't even answer sensible questions like, how many kids have you seen? What's happened to them since? How many of them had autistic spectrum disorders, how many had other mental conditions. They just didn't know the answers to these things. They were operating in a most amateurish way.